Hello. Today I want to talk about political interaction and survival for the Bābī movement. This is from my Resource Mobilization and the Bābī movement series. The original paper on which these videos is based is one I wrote with Moojan Momen back in 1986, the Bābī movement, a resource mobilization perspective. So you should look at that if you want to see the academic references. Two general points about the series of videos. Firstly, there's still a lot of work to be done in the field of Bābī studies. No doubt further research will add to our understanding of this complex movement. And secondly, this is basically a sociological paper looking at the ways in which a particular theory within the sociology of social movements may be relevant to our understanding of the Bābī movement. In terms of the historical work, it reflects what we were reading at the time of the writing of the article 35 years ago now. In terms of political interaction, the interaction between any social movement and its wider environment plays a crucial role in its development. In the process, movements, objectives, and modes of action are rarely unchanged. Thus, whilst any major millenarian movement in a pre-modern society bears an implicit or explicit political dimension, the actual expression of that political charge is not predetermined. Of note, however, is Smeltzer's observation that harsh but ineffective repression of a movement is likely to engender revolutionary action. The Bāb's challenge to the existing social order was interactive with the response of his potential supporters and opponents. Successive rebuttals, at first by the non-Bābī sheikhs, then by other clerical leaders, and finally by the government, shaped the nature of the continuing Bābī challenge. Whatever the exact planning behind the summons to gather in Karbala in 1845, which at least some Bābīs took to be a call to arms, the Bāb at that point still accorded the Qajar regime at least nominal legitimacy and sought to convert its chiefs to his cause. Later, the positive intervention of the governor of Isfahan on his behalf in 1846-47 marked the zenith of such hopes. Only after his exile to Azerbaijan were these hopes dashed, and the courts and the Qajar court declared to be the object of divine wrath and chastisement. The growth of Bābī radicalism and militancy was similarly interactive. From the beginning, some Bābī missionaries, such as Mullah Sadaq in Shiraz and Tahre in Karbala, were prepared to be quite provocative in the public presentation of their cause. As clerical opposition hardened and the incidence of persecution increased, many Bābīs became increasingly intransigent and radical in their attitudes. Some went further. In several towns, Bābīs began to carry weapons openly, and at Qazvin they even began to manufacture swords. In this deteriorating situation, even quite trivial incidents could provoke violent confrontations. Once such incidents had occurred, the escalation and extension of violence became ever more likely. As such escalation took place, government intervention against the Bābīs became virtually inevitable. In the resultant armed struggle, the process of polarization was completed. The Bābīs dispatched their ungodly opponents to hell, whilst the government leaders readily and increasingly saw all Bābīs as active insurrectionaries. The wider purpose of these conflicts remains a matter of controversy. However, whether or not they formed part of a carefully prepared insurrectionary conspiracy, as presented by some authors, a view that the present authors would seriously question, the conflicts should be viewed against the background of established patterns of religious and urban violence in 19th century Iran. Most Iranian towns were divided into a number of rival and religiously defined district factions, each with its own patrician patrons and local associations. Intercommunal fighting was common. Large-scale conversions to the Bābī religion reflected these divisions. Again, leading ulama were linked to the factions by their patronage of groups of toughs, lutis. With the increasing assertion of clerical power, interclerical disputes were thus readily prosecuted by resort to street fighting and the physical intimidation of opponents. The persecution of the Babis and their own resort to violence were not abnormal in this regard. What was abnormal was the length and intensity of the resultant conflicts. The religious interests of the rival parties were crucial here. Fervent in their commitment to their cause, the Babis confronted an increasingly assertive clergy whose leaders perceived Babism as a dangerous heresy fundamentally inimical to their own interests. As to the actual outbreaks of violence, particular local factors were also evidently crucial. Thus, despite the widespread expansion of the movement, both violent confrontations, as in Qazvin and Mashhad, and major conflicts, as at Barfaroush, Tabasi, Yazd, Neriz, and Zanjan, were limited to a number of particular towns and Babi groups. Whatever the motivation of the Babis in these particular incidents, the local situations appear to have been characterized by an unusual degree of tension. In Mashhad and Yazd, Babi violence took place against a background of wider civil unrest. In Qazvin and Barfaroush, powerful and militant anti-Babi clerics confronted uncompromising groups of Babis, and in Zanjan and Neriz, the conversion of leading religious notables led to large-scale Babi conversions and conditions of local political instability. Where these factors did not develop, there were no Babi upheavals. A movement's survival doesn't depend only on its internal ability to develop some form of organization and to recruit new members, but also external factors. A key factor in that survival is the relationship which develops between the movement and the wider society. Note that the relationship between the movement and its environment may change over time. It is dynamic and not static. There is an interaction between the two. Only when this relationship is relatively stable and peaceful can the thought of external threats to survival be ignored and the movement's membership concentrate on the accomplishment of established movement goals. Conversely, when the relationship between the movement and its environment is turbulent and uncertain, survival is liable to become the central concern for movement leaders. When survival becomes the central concern for movement leaders, the primary strategic task becomes the concern with learning to adapt to change. Those movements whose leaders choose to ignore this task or who are unaware of the implications of environmental interaction are unlikely to survive. In those cases where actual conflict with the authorities occurs, non-survival may take the form of physical extirpation. The relationship between the Babis and the wider Iranian society was evidently unstable and eventually conflictual. Although the movement was finally destroyed by the authorities, most of its leaders seem to have been aware of the implications of environmental interaction and to have taken pains to ensure the movement's survival. That they were unsuccessful in this objective is an indication of the difficulty of successfully managing such interaction. Certainly, in organizational terms, the Babis were flexible and responsive to change. Their leaders and missionaries were not bureaucratic functionaries tied to static goals and methods, but rather charismatic leaders who creatively responded to a variety of contexts and local situations. Likewise, their followers were unlikely to have been involved in the movement on a purely instrumental basis. Participation was necessarily its own reward, and the high levels of commitment were soon engendered. Thank you very much for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement. If you want to support my channel, you're very welcome to do so. Please do like and comment and share the videos. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. If you want to provide practical support, I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below. Next week we have the final episode in this now rather long series of videos on resource mobilization. The video next week will be entitled Strategic Choice and Tactical Management. Have a good day.